Hey guys, I'm back with more great JRPGs that I don't think I'll ever beat again. I loved most of these, but one playthrough was more than enough for me. I'll explain why, so let's begin. Number 10. Soul Hackers. This is a fantastic turn-based RPG that not many people know. It's actually a remaster of an old game on the Sega Saturn, which was later ported to the PS1. Those two original versions never left Japan. That's okay, since this 3DS release seems to be the definitive and best version of it to play. You don't need to play anything else to understand it. So I mentioned it was a turn-based RPG, didn't I? But it's also a dungeon crawler in first person. You know how I feel about those, I just can't get into them. But I still recommend them in my videos when I see potential, especially this one since it's by far the best one I've ever played, which is the reason why I beat it in the first place. Yes, it's brutal and grindy like most SMT games, but that's not the reason why I'll never beat it again. The reason is because, well, I just don't see myself beating a game from a subgenre I rarely enjoy again. Getting lost in the long labyrinths and with random encounters? No thanks, once was more than enough for me. But if you're into dungeon crawlers, this is an absolute must play. Number 9. Exist Archive. Developed by Tri-Ace and Spike Chunsoft, this underappreciated game came out on the PS4 and the PS Vita. It plays fully in 2D with side-scrolling and platforming involved, like the original Valkyrie Profile game. Battle system though is in a 3D perspective, with each character's actions controlled by one button, again similar to Valkyrie Profile. The game's great, with fun combat, nice looking visuals, cool soundtrack and an interesting story. It also has multiple routes and endings during the last chapters. But it's a grindfest. That's right. You'll be fighting constantly for levels to beat those nasty bosses or even to stand a chance at surviving the next dungeon or area. Fortunately, it isn't a long game, as it can be beaten in about 30 to 40 hours, grinding included. But yeah, about half of that time will be spent on fighting battles. However, this one has a new game plus where almost everything carries over, but you can't exactly breeze through it because you still have to go through some annoying things like the challenging platforming areas. So yeah, I think I'm fine with only one playthrough. It's a really good game, so it's definitely worth at least one. Number 8. Phantasy Star Universe. This is a tough one to beat. It isn't all that hard though, but still, well, let me explain. It's an action RPG with, yes, an offline story mode and self-contained plot. Various sequels were released on the PS2 and PSP, but they all have the exact same problem. I do like some of them a bit more, so who knows if I'll ever beat them again. Probably not. But this one, I'm sure of it since I already attempted a second playthrough a long time ago and gave up about halfway through. It's a bit grindy, but not exactly what I'd call a grindfest. It's hard and getting used to it takes a while, but eventually you get good and it'll be alright. The problem is that at some point, the missions start getting really long, often making you backtrack a lot to find keys to open doors, or sometimes getting you straight up lost. There's usually only 1 or 2 checkpoints per mission, but they're so far apart, so if you die, you'll have to spend a big chunk of time redoing the same areas again, and that means fighting the same enemies again. It's exhausting. The game's still pretty darn good and I do recommend it, but it's no masterpiece. It has its problems and I just don't think it's worth playing through twice. Number 7. TI2 Tiara 2. This is a pretty obscure game and a sequel to a game that never left Japan. Fortunately, the story is self-contained and you don't need to play the first one to understand it. A grid-based strategy RPG exclusive to the PlayStation 3. But it's also, yep, a visual novel. No walls of text, don't worry, but rather a crap ton of dialogue, especially during the first half of the game. For some reason the second half is more forgiving but still can go bonkers with chit-chat every now and then. So for starters, the insane amount of dialogue despite being a well-written story puts me off. Scenes can be skipped and dialogue can be fast-forwarded, but still, it'll take a while every time you want to get to the next mission. The game's tough, despite having difficulty settings. Even on easy mode, you'll have to grind near the end of the game. The New Game Plus carries over items, equipment and money, so okay, that probably sounds more inviting to a second playthrough, but levels reset, so you'll only be fine for a certain period of time. Nothing, however, changes the fact that the visual novel shenanigans will still be there, and I just don't feel like dealing with that a second time. Number 6. Chaos Wars. Another strategy RPG I'll probably never beat again is this one. A crossover featuring characters from Growlancer, Shadow Hearts, Spectral Souls, etc. It was a low-budget game with absolutely terrible English dub, but thankfully the Japanese dub is available and it's fine. It's no visual novel or anything, but it will have a bit more dialogue than your average game. It can be skipped if you want to. So why is it that I'll never beat it again? Just like with Phantasy Star Universe, I actually tried a second playthrough many years ago, and gave up halfway through as well, because it's just way too grindy. Extremely grindy if I'm being honest. I wanted to beat it again because the characters from the different games you get may differ depending on what you do. So I found that interesting enough to play it again and get them all, like in Chrono Cross. But the game's brutal nature exhausted me and I just couldn't bring myself to finish it twice. That is the only replay value this game has since the New Game Plus is a joke and barely anything carries over. So I think playing this only once with a guide to get the characters you want is the best tip I can give you. Number 5. The Unicorn Princess. Like its title implies, this is a unicorn simulator. You basically control a female protagonist and then she has to ride the unicorn and go outside and you got to take care of them. Of course it's not the Unicorn Princess, it's Fire Emblem Fates! This is a game cut into 3 volumes, each being a different route with its own ending. I beat all 3 years ago and enjoyed the gameplay mechanics. Honestly, in terms of battle system, the games are still good and recommended. Let's leave it at that. But the story and characters, most of them at least, are straight up ridiculous. It's a cringe fest. And yes, scenes can be skipped and dialogue can be fast forwarded, so if you want to play them again, you can just do that. Well, guess what? I also tried a second playthrough with this game. I did it with Birthright. But a few hours later, I was bored. I planned to skip all the mind-blowing stupidity of the plot, but having to do so over and over is still a chore, and the battle system just wasn't as great as I thought. I think it's because I just care nothing for most characters, despite some of them being badass in battle. Or maybe because Birthright is just way too easy, and I probably should have replayed Conquest instead? I don't think there's any value in a second playthrough on all 3. Being 3 separate releases with 3 different routes makes them all together one long-ass game, and that's enough for a lifetime. There are honestly several Fire Emblem games out there that are far, far better than this one. For a second playthrough, I mean, of course. Number 4. The Legend of Heroes, the Gagarv Trilogy. I haven't talked about this trilogy in a while. People often ask me about them in my Q&As. They aren't part of the Trails series and therefore aren't connected to them in any way. All 3 games are decent, especially a Tear of Vermilion, which had a darker and edgier story than the other 2, which are pretty lighthearted. I honestly felt I was playing an Atelier game with those 2. They aren't difficult, maybe except Vermilion's final boss. They come with an okay cast of characters, story, traditional RPG gameplay, turn-based battles with a very small twist, graphics, music, etc. And that is a problem here. Everything is just okay. They're good games but nothing special. They're still worth playing through because they're interconnected, it's a trilogy, it's interesting, and like I said, they're fun to play. But I wouldn't go on a second playthrough ever, because while there's nothing wrong with them, there's just a heck of a lot of RPGs out there nowadays that are better than this. In fact, the only reason why I included them in the list was to represent any other RPG of this kind. The it's okay kind, you know what I mean? So they're worth playing just once. Number 3, The Last Story. This game entitles quite the unique scenario. The reason why I'll never beat it again has to do with its new game plus. My first playthrough was wholesome, I enjoyed it, loved it, and have strongly recommended it ever since. I think it's one of the best JRPGs on the Wii. It's got a rather unique approach to gameplay and battle missions. Often you find different requirements to complete them, forcing you to strategize on how to control your characters. So that makes it challenging, but not necessarily hard. The grinding is minimum, though still recommended near the end. So why wouldn't I replay such a unique action RPG? First, because controls, interface and visuals are starting to show its age. It's a bit dated. Normally that wouldn't be a problem, but it's here because some missions are quite tricky to pull off. Therefore, it isn't that enjoyable anymore, and I imagine going through them a second time could be painful. But not if you were overpowered, right? Right? Yeah, about that. This is the unique scenario I mentioned at the beginning. Barely anything carries over on a new game plus, no levels, equipment, items, etc. And to make matters even worse, it's now harder. It's as if New Game Plus was just there as a hard or nightmare mode. Very funny. I think I'll wait forever if I have to for the game to be remastered with some quality of life features. Otherwise, I think I'll never beat it again. Number 2, Kingdom Hearts 2. No, it's not because I'm not a fan of the series, even though that's a legitimate reason not to beat it again. It's the only Kingdom Hearts game I've ever finished and I'm fine with that. It was my first, so nostalgia makes me look back with positive memories in my head. But there's one very negative memory and it will always make me remember. This is a ridiculously hard and frustrating video game. Some bosses are insanely hard, and the battle mechanics, including the controls, don't really help much. Sora feels kinda janky and somewhat sluggish most of the time. I know it's been ported and remastered a million times and maybe the difficulty was fixed, but that's not the only issue here. It's also one of those where the heck do I go type of game, and you get lost quite often in the many different areas of the many different worlds you visit. Cheesing through the game on a second playthrough sounds fine, but I'll have to still put up with this crappy exploration and its dumbass dialogue. As I mentioned with previous games in this video, sometimes skipping scenes and dialogue can still feel like a chore. So yeah, I'll never beat it again. Regardless, I will always treasure my one and only playthrough of this action RPG. Number 1, Tales of Graces F. Underrated Tales game here. Generational with character progression, awesome music, graphics and storytelling. I love it, but I'll cut to the chase. It's too freaking hard! The battle system and controls are a pain to learn and I don't feel like I fully understood it. I never quite took advantage of it and sucked the entire playthrough. It's one of those games that even on easy are still a big grind fest, especially if you don't learn how to abuse the battle mechanics. Building combos here doesn't equal button mashing your controller. You always have to know how to execute them, apart from learning how to guard and dodge against the broken ass enemies and bosses. I think the only reason why I beat it is because I grinded a lot and got lucky with healing spells and gels. I still vastly enjoyed my playthrough of it, but it's definitely a game I don't think I can ever bring myself to beat again. Even if it was remastered or something, adding quality of life features and rebalancing the difficulty, I will think it twice to be honest. And those were 10 more JRPGs I'll never beat again. Thanks for watching, don't forget to subscribe and share this video with your friends. See you next time!